December 17, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Senior Corporal Hans Müller huddled in his frigid trench, recording observations in his journal that would torment him for years to come. The Yankees aren't comparable to the Soviets. Their cannonade belongs to another realm entirely. It's not merely the quantity of projectiles, though that alone is horrifying. It's the velocity. It's the precision. It's the realization that reaction time is non-existent. Silence prevails one instant, and the next, existence itself detonates. Through the thick mist that morning, Müller observed something that demolished every preconception German troops maintained about United States combat capabilities. His battalion, component of the 6th SS Panzer Army, had just initiated Hitler's ultimate Western gamble. They had achieved total surprise against lightly defended American positions. Triumph appeared attainable. Then, American batteries located them. What Müller couldn't comprehend, what no German infantryman advancing through those frost-covered woodlands could have anticipated, was that they were about to confront the deadliest artillery network ever fielded in armed conflict. A mechanism so sophisticated, so catastrophic, and so meticulously synchronized that it would shatter Germany's final assault and expose the genuine extent of American martial dominance.
The deterioration had commenced well before the Bulge campaign. Throughout 1943-1944, German veterans reassigned from the Eastern Front to confront American units in Italy, France, and the Low Countries carried assumptions shaped in brutal engagements against Soviet batteries. They had discovered survival techniques against Russian bombardments through harsh battlefield wisdom. The Soviets would launch ranging rounds, granting German personnel valuable moments to find shelter. The munitions would strike in recognizable patterns, permitting movement between salvos. The fire coordination proceeded slowly, requiring 10 to 15 minutes from spotting to impact. The Americans proved different, terrifyingly different. Sergeant Otto Schmidt, a veteran of 24 months on the Eastern Front, captured with the Afrika Korps in Tunisia during May 1943, would later recount his initial American artillery encounter in a post-conflict interview. "We had established positions in a dry riverbed north of Tunis. Adequate protection, we believed. The Russians would have required 60 minutes to locate us and another 60 to adjust their cannons. We felt secure enough to warm morning coffee. Then we spotted it, a tiny aircraft no larger than a scout plane droning overhead at roughly 500 meters. We hardly noticed. Such craft carried no armament. We presumed it was conducting reconnaissance photography. 3 minutes later, without alert, without ranging shots, without any indication, the entire wadi erupted. Shells impacting simultaneously, not sequentially. Air bursts overhead, ground bursts in our midst. In half a minute, my company ceased functioning as a combat unit. I was among 11 survivors from 123 men."
The aircraft Schmidt observed was an L-4 Grasshopper, the American Forward Observer's aerial platform. These unremarkable Piper Cubs would become the most dreaded planes in the German military, not for any ordnance they carried, but for what followed their appearance. German troops learned a harsh reality. When a Grasshopper appeared overhead, you possessed minutes, perhaps mere seconds, before American artillery transformed your location into a slaughter zone. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, an artillery officer who had directed counter-battery operations on the Eastern Front, documented his amazement in correspondence discovered decades later in German military archives. "I studied American artillery protocols from seized documents. Initially, I assumed these papers were disinformation, propaganda intended to intimidate. No artillery system could function as described. The synchronization required would be impossible. Then I witnessed it personally. Near Seno, an L-4 appeared. We tracked it, preparing to relocate our cannons per standard procedure. Before we could shift, before we had even calculated firing data for counter-battery action, American projectiles struck our position. Not random fire, not area saturation, precise strikes on each weapon. They had computed firing solutions, coordinated multiple batteries at varying ranges, and delivered simultaneous fire faster than our own observers could radio map coordinates to our fire control center. The secret to American artillery supremacy rested not on a solitary breakthrough, but on a comprehensive framework integrating technology, instruction, and manufacturing capacity at a level Germany could never equal. The cornerstone was the Fire Direction Center, a concept that revolutionized artillery deployment. While German batteries calculated firing solutions independently, American batteries transmitted all data to a central fire direction center that could synchronize fire from scores of batteries concurrently. The FDC system relied on pre-calculated firing charts. In facilities across America, rooms filled with women operated mechanical calculators, slide rules, and logarithmic tables computing firing solutions for every imaginable combination of variables: wind velocity and direction, temperature, humidity, barrel erosion, propellant temperature, elevation differences between cannon and objective. These charts, printed in booklets compact enough for map cases, enabled American fire direction officers to compute exact firing solutions in minutes rather than hours. Captain Vera Hoffman, a mathematics professor conscripted into Wehrmacht artillery, examined captured American firing charts after hostilities ended. His analysis, preserved in German military records, revealed stunned admiration. These charts represent years of computational labor, thousands of hours on mechanical calculators. They computed solutions for every variable we might face in combat. Our own firing tables were primitive by comparison, requiring extensive field calculations for each mission. The Americans had completed the mathematics beforehand. In the field, they simply consulted the answer.
But charts alone couldn't explain American artillery's devastating impact. The genuine revolution was time on target, a firing method so advanced that few nations possessed the capability to execute it. Time on target, universally abbreviated as TOT, synchronized artillery fire so that shells from multiple batteries fired at different intervals based on their distance from the objective arrived simultaneously within a 3-second window. The effect was catastrophic. German soldiers experienced no warning, no ranging shots, no gradual escalation of fire. One moment, silence. The next moment, dozens of shells detonating in unison. Troops in the open, whose survival against traditional artillery depended on hitting the ground at the first explosion, had no opportunity to react. Post-war studies revealed that 66% of artillery casualties occurred in the initial seconds of a barrage. Time on target maximized casualties by eliminating warning. Staff Sergeant Kurt Zimmerman, who survived TOT strikes during the Bulge, wrote in his diary discovered by American forces in a seized command post, "It isn't artillery as we comprehended, it's something novel. You hear nothing, then existence terminates. Every projectile arrives in the same second. The air bursts kill men who would survive ground bursts. The ground bursts kill men who would survive air bursts. There's no time to dive for cover, no time to reach a hole, no time even to fall flat. You're simply alive one moment and wounded or deceased the next."
American artillery response velocity shocked German commanders. German artillery, considered among the world's finest, could deliver fire in 8 to 10 minutes under optimal conditions. American artillery routinely delivered accurate fire in 3 minutes. This speed derived from multiple factors. American forward observers employed new FM radios that provided clear, static-free communication. German forces still relied primarily on AM radios plagued by interference. American radios were also far more abundant. Every infantry battalion possessed multiple radio-equipped forward observers. German battalions typically had 1 or 2 radios, often shared between units. The observers themselves represented another American advantage. German forward observers were artillery officers, often lacking infantry training or experience. American forward observers were specially trained personnel who understood both artillery and infantry tactics. They moved with infantry units, lived with infantry soldiers, and coordinated fire as an integrated part of combined arms operations. Moreover, American artillery observers could call upon an entire corps' artillery, not just their own battalion. The system allowed a single forward observer to coordinate fire from dozens of batteries within minutes. A lieutenant calling for fire support could bring down metal equivalent to a small airstrike, delivered more accurately and rapidly than any air support could provide. The artillery pieces themselves demonstrated American industrial superiority. The M2A1 105mm howitzer, the standard American light artillery piece, was a marvel of engineering and manufacturing. Rock Island Arsenal had perfected production techniques that allowed rapid manufacturing to precise tolerances. By war's end, 8,536 M2A1 howitzers had been produced. Each American infantry division possessed 36 of these howitzers, organized into 3 battalions of 12 guns each. These battalions were fully motorized, towed by trucks or half-tracks that could travel at highway speeds. Displacement from one firing position to another, an evolution that took German horse-drawn artillery 2 to 3 hours, took American motorized batteries 20 to 30 minutes. The contrast in mobility was stark. German artillery remained predominantly horse-drawn throughout the war. Despite Nazi propaganda showing mechanized panzer divisions, approximately 80% of German motive power relied on horses for transport. Germany started World War II with 514,000 horses and ended with 1,198,000 by February 1945. Each German artillery piece required 6 to 8 horses and took hours to limber, move, and unlimber. In winter conditions, movement became nearly impossible. Corporal Paul Richter, assigned to a German artillery battery in Normandy, kept a detailed diary that survived the war. We watched American artillery displaced during battle. They fired their mission, then trucks appeared. Within 20 minutes, the entire battery had limbered their guns and departed. We required 2 hours minimum to perform the same evolution, assuming good weather and roads. In mud or under fire, we might need 4 hours. The Americans would establish a new position and be ready to fire again before we finished moving. We were fighting a 19th century war with horses against an enemy fighting a 20th century war with trucks. The outcome was inevitable. American 155mm howitzers provided even more devastating fire support. Each division had 12 M1 155mm howitzers in a separate battalion. These guns, firing 43-kilogram shells to ranges exceeding 14,000 meters, provided division commanders with heavy punch, capable of destroying fortifications that would survive smaller caliber fire. The 155mm was itself a triumph of engineering. Designed in the late 1930s and standardized in May 1941, it combined range, accuracy, and reliability. 10,300 were produced during the war. The gun could be towed at highway speeds, allowing rapid displacement. Rate of fire was 4 rounds per minute, though well-trained crews could briefly achieve 6 rounds per minute. But even these divisional assets paled beside the artillery available at corps and army level. American Corps artillery typically included battalions of 155mm guns, 8-inch howitzers, and massive 240mm howitzers. These weapons, capable of destroying any fortification, could be called upon by forward observers at battalion level. The pyramiding of firepower meant a single rifle company could, within minutes, bring down fire from divisional, corps, and even army artillery. German artillery, by contrast, was rigidly organized. Corps and army artillery were separate commands, not available to support divisional operations without extensive coordination and approval through multiple headquarters. German infantry divisions had their own artillery, but calling fire from corps artillery required routing requests through division to corps, often taking hours for approval.
By the time fire arrived, if it arrived at all, American mobile warfare had moved to the front line. Lieutenant Joachim Weber, a forward observer who had requested Corps artillery support during the Normandy campaign, documented his frustration. "I called for Corps artillery at 0915 hours. The enemy was massing tanks for an assault. I provided exact coordinates, described the target, explained the tactical situation. At 1330 hours, 4 hours later, I finally received fire. 3 salvos. By that time, American tanks had completed their attack and withdrawn. Our position was overrun. I survived only by luck. The Corps artillery, which might have saved us, arrived too late to matter."
The technical sophistication of American artillery extended to the ammunition itself. While Germany struggled with propellant shortages and inconsistent shell production, American industry delivered ammunition in seemingly unlimited quantities manufactured to precise specifications that ensured consistent performance. More significantly, the Americans deployed the variable time fuse, the VT fuse, a technological marvel that proved decisive. The VT fuse, also called the proximity fuse, contained a miniature radar transmitter and receiver in the shell's nose. The transmitter broadcast a radio signal. When the shell approached the ground or any object, the reflected signal triggered detonation. The result was a shell that exploded at optimal height for maximum lethality, typically 10 to 20 meters above ground. The VT fuse transformed artillery effectiveness. Conventional time fuses required calculating precise time to target, then setting the fuse accordingly. Wind, temperature, barrel wear, all affected shell flight time. Even small errors meant shells exploding too high or burying themselves before detonation. The VT fuse eliminated these variables, guaranteeing optimal airburst regardless of conditions. The VT fuse had first been used in combat by the USS Helena on January 5, 1943, shooting down a Japanese dive bomber off Guadalcanal with only 2 to 3 salvos. Throughout 1943-1944, VT fuses proved devastatingly effective in naval anti-aircraft operations and against V-1 flying bombs over England. However, concerns about the technology falling into German hands prevented its use in ground artillery over Europe. General Dwight Eisenhower personally requested permission to employ VT fuses during the Battle of the Bulge, arguing that their effectiveness justified the security risk. The Pentagon initially refused, but Eisenhower protested vehemently. Formal authorization came on December 19 to 21, 1944, shortly after the German offensive began. This marked the first use of VT fuses against ground troops in the European theater. The decision proved correct. VT-fused shells devastated German formations caught in the open during the Ardennes offensive. Naval anti-aircraft tests had shown VT fuses were 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional fuses against V-1 flying bombs. VT fuses destroyed 79% of all incoming targets. The lethal fragment area was 3,000 square feet versus 60 square feet for conventional fuses. Some estimates suggested VT fuses increased artillery effectiveness by 200 to 700%. Troops who had learned to survive conventional artillery by seeking any depression discovered that VT fuses negated such cover. The shells exploded above them, showering downward with deadly fragments that struck men prone in shallow holes.
Senior Corporal Hans Müller, whose diary opened this account, survived a VT fuse barrage and recorded his experience. "We had learned on the Eastern Front to flatten ourselves at the first explosion. Even shallow depressions offered protection from fragments traveling horizontally. But these shells, these demon shells, as we called them, exploded above us. The fragments descended like rain. Men in foxholes, men who should have been protected, were killed by fragments falling vertically. There was no defense except deep bunkers, and we had no time to dig deep bunkers. We simply died." The psychological impact of VT fuses compounded their physical effects. German soldiers trained to respond to artillery by seeking cover found their training irrelevant.
The knowledge that no cover short of overhead protection would save them induced paralysis. Some units refused to leave defensive positions, even under direct orders, because movement in the open meant certain death if American artillery engaged them. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer documented a near mutiny in his unit during the final weeks of the Ardennes offensive. My company was ordered to attack an American position 300 meters distant. The men refused. They had seen what American artillery did to troops in the open, especially with these new fuses that burst in air. I tried to explain that we would die anyway if we did not attack, that the Americans would eventually overrun our position. The men would not move. They preferred the possibility of capture to the certainty of death under American artillery fire. The industrial capacity that produced American artillery and ammunition in such quantities represented another dimension of superiority that German soldiers could not comprehend. Rock Island Arsenal alone produced over 10,000 105mm howitzers. Multiple factories produced 155mm howitzers and heavier weapons. Shell production reached staggering levels throughout the war. German production, hampered by Allied bombing, resource shortages, and inefficient industrial allocation, never approached American levels. German artillery pieces were often superior in design to their American counterparts, but Germany produced them in insufficient numbers and lacked the industrial capacity to maintain production as the war continued. By 1944, German artillery batteries often operated at half strength, with guns destroyed or worn out and no replacements available. More critically, German ammunition production could not sustain intensive operations. German artillery batteries were often limited to minimal daily allowances, sometimes as few as 2 to 3 shells per gun per day. American batteries faced no such restrictions. Forward observers could call for fire freely, knowing that ammunition supply was effectively unlimited. Lieutenant Werner Vogel, a German artillery officer, documented the ammunition crisis in his war diary. We received 50 shells per gun for the entire week, 50 shells to support an infantry regiment facing continuous American attacks. I was required to justify each fire mission to battalion, explaining why this particular